Hello everybody, this is Mr. Henson. Today we're looking at the nitrogen and the phosphorus cycle. In this video we're going to focus on the nitrogen cycle and how it happens. Now our essential idea of this unit is that soil cycles are subject to disruption. In other words, they can be disrupted by different man-made practices or human practices. Okay, so when we're talking about the nitrogen cycle, one of the key elements is that you have to be able to draw, label and annotate the nitrogen cycle. And where students traditionally struggle with this is remembering all the different processes and remembering the names of the different bacteria involved. And you might actually have a wonder at this stage what bacteria have actually got to do with it. So first thing we're going to do is look at what these nitrogen fixing bacteria can do. Now remember, humans and animals are unable to use the gaseous nitrogen. Unfortunately, it's just held together too tightly as N2, and that's triple covalent bond. So when we breathe in nitrogen, we just simply breathe it back out again because we can't actually break it down. It's the same with plants. So nitrogen has to be changed into a form that it can actually be taken up by plants, and then of course, when other animals eat the plants, the nitrogen is then passed on up the food chain up to the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so on, until eventually it gets to us as humans. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is look at those different types of bacteria. So first of all, there's plenty of nitrogen gas in the environment. 80% of the gas around us is nitrogen. And so first of all, we have to harness that nitrogen. And so there are two types of bacteria that do that. We've got one called Rhizobium and one called Azotobacter. And what these bacteria do is they take nitrogen gas and they change it into NH3 or ammonia. Okay? There's then a second form of bacteria called Nitrosomonas. Okay? Nitrosomonas is a chemoautotroph. Okay? And they're taking their energy from the bonds and the compounds they're converting. So they're taking the ammonia and they're changing the ammonia into something called nitrates, NO2. Okay, and so in doing that, the nitrosomonas are getting their energy. Okay, so they can class them as chemoautotrophs. Okay, they're not like photoautotrophs that get their energy from the sun. They're getting their energy for carbon fixation from basically cracking the bonds in ammonia and turning it into nitrates. Nitrates then, again, most plants can't use nitrates, and so there has to be another type of bacteria which are called Nitrobacter. And what they do is they change the nitrites, NO2, into nitrates, which is NO3. Now you can see here you've got minuses and minuses. That means these are ions. Okay, so NO2 minus nitrites is an ion. It means the atoms have a charge, and the same with nitrates. So nitrates and ammonia are often what's taken up by the plants. Okay. So let's go back to those first two types of bacteria. We talked about Azotobacter and we talked about Rhizobium. Okay, so Azotobacter live freely within the soil. They don't have any kind of relationship with the plants. And so what happens is they just change the gaseous nitrogen into ammonium. That ammonium then is changed into nitrites and then into nitrates. And that all happens within the soil. Okay, so what's going to happen is then the water is going to move through the soil and it's going to move these ions with it towards the roots. Okay, there's another type of bacteria called Rhizobium, and these are often not free living but found in a close relationship or a mutualistic relationship. Okay, now you can see, and these roots here, these little nodules. Okay, now what these are small colonies of bacteria which are growing off the roots. Okay, and so what the bacteria are doing is they're converting that gaseous nitrogen into ammonia, and so they're supplying ammonia to the plant. Okay, and the legume requires that ammonia for the synthesis of its amino acids. So remember, that's why we need the nitrogen in the first place, is so that these plants can synthesize amino acids and make their own proteins. So what you might think, what does the legume or the plant get out of this relationship? Well, the plant itself, is getting the ammonia, and the bacteria is getting carbohydrates for respiration. So that's an example of mutualism where both organisms are benefiting from this relationship. Okay, so often we have something called denitrification occurring, okay, which involves one last final set of bacteria, and that's the changing of nitrate back into gaseous nitrogen, okay? And this is carried out by a group of bacteria called Pseudomonas, and we call that process, which reduces the availability of nitrogen, okay, and turns it back into nitrogen gas, called denitrification, okay, denitrification. And so this denitrification often occurs in soils that are waterlogged, okay, so you can imagine in soils that are waterlogged, there's a reduction in the availability of oxygen, okay? And generally what happens in cellular respiration, Pseudomonas, this type of bacteria, will use oxygen, okay, as in what we call the electron transport chain, which is a part of the respiration kind of process, okay? And so generally most organisms need that oxygen for this electron transport chain, okay? Now these type of bacteria are modified so that they can use nitrate instead of oxygen in their electron transport chain, okay? So in oxygen poor conditions, this is where this process of denitrification will happen, okay? Where this bacteria have to use nitrate instead of oxygen for this process. So oxygen poor conditions are generally areas that are waterlogged, okay? Because in these areas that are waterlogged, the oxygen is used up really, really quickly, okay? And so that's a sort of an example of where it's gone back round. Interestingly enough, in areas where nitrogen is quite limited, insectivorous plants have overcome that low nitrogen availability in waterlogged soils by trapping insects and absorbing the ammonia released by digesting them. So you can see Venus flytrap here, okay? This is called the sundries, which insects are sticking to them and they're taking the ammonia out of their bodies. So these aren't true heterotrophic organisms because they're not taking in and digesting all of these different things. All they're taking in is ammonia, okay? And so that's basically an adaptation to cope with having nitrogen poor soils. Well, how do they do this? They've got modified leaves that have evolved to trap insects, okay? They've got sensory hairs in them so they can sense when an insect is in there. And so what happens is they'll sense where that organism, the fly or the bug or the insect is in there. They will close up, trapping the fly or whatever the animal is, the organism is. They will secrete organisms that will externally digest it, and then they will absorb the nitrogen compounds into the plant. So again, let's look at the nitrogen cycle as a whole, okay? It's such a complex cycle, and hence why it's a part of this part of the HL course. So here's your atmospheric nitrogen. Okay, so atmospheric nitrogen, we're trying to fix it first of all. So the first route it could take, it could be that mutualistic relationship with rhizobium, or it could go through the free living bacteria, which is the Azotobacter, both of which are involved in this process of nitrification, that changing nitrogen gas into ammonium. Okay, ammonium then is changed into by Nitrosomonas into nitrites, and then by Nitrobacter into nitrates. And you can see this is the process of nitrification here: ammonium into nitrites, nitrites into nitrates. Those nitrates then are uptaken and assimilated by the plant, okay, or they're directly taken. Ammonium is directly taken into the plants, okay, and used to make plant proteins. Okay, those plants can either be eaten by an organism, and obviously those guys are going to take the nitrogen in, okay, or they're going to die, okay, and that's the same for the rabbit. The rabbit could also die. Decomposers then are going to break down that plant or animal material. So remember our decomposers, earthworms or saprotrophs like bacteria and fungi, and they're going to release the nitrogen in the form of ammonia back into the ground. Okay, so it's delivering ammonia back into the ground. So nitrites, can get converted into nitrates, and if that nitrate is not converted back into plants, it could undergo denitrification by Pseudomonas and end up back as gaseous nitrogen, or N2. Other processes that can get nitrogen into the soil, okay, which one we haven't talked about. One is HELA, which is lightning. Lightning is a huge amount of energy in a little confined to a very small space, and this can fix gaseous nitrogen, which then falls to the ground as nitrate. It causes a reaction between nitrogen gas and oxygen gas and converting it to nitrate. Fertilizers can often be made using the Haber process, where you've got lots of nitrogen put into the fertilizer. Again, and that can be put into the ground in the form of nitrate. It can also go into the ground as ammonium. Okay. Now that completes the nitrogen cycle. There'll be another short video discussing the phosphorus cycle shortly coming up.